President Barrow renews his government support for the education sector as he presides over the 13th UDG conversation ceremony. Nigeria's government to boost its revenue collection by 15% amidst the impact of the COVID-19. And the United Nations chief receives his second vaccination jab as the COVID-19 immunization continues. Well, these and more coming your way on this week. This is Africa TV and many thanks for joining us. I am Amadou Kante and now the news in detail. Now, President Adama Barrow on Saturday led the 13th conversation ceremony of the University of the Gambia. The Gambian leader praised his government's efforts in promoting the higher education system in the country. And let's have more details of that in this report by Khadija Tuseka.
Presiding over the ceremony, the Chancellor of the University of the Gambia, President Adama Barrow, says that every university should build students' resilience to cope with different situations. Barrow lauded his government's achievement in promoting the higher education system while promising more development for the education sector under his leadership.
My government acknowledges the significant strides registered in the higher education sector over the last couple of years. Not to mention other qualifications, the Gambia can now boast of many masters and PhD degree holders who live and work in country or outside. We appreciate these achievements and assure you that education will always be given top priority by my government.
Professor Iqbal Mohamed Chowdhury, Coordinator General of Comstech, commended the UTG management for its effort in introducing a PhD program. He also said that consultations with the Ministry for Higher Education has begun to introduce special programs at the country's highest learning institution in May 2021.
On behalf of the 57-member State Ministerial Committee for Science and Technology, which is headquartered in Islamabad, Comstech, I would like to assure you that we are in a great depth discussion with the Minister of Higher Education and Science and Technology to initiate a special program for Gambia. And this includes special research fellowships, establishment of a virology laboratory, establishment of a center for nutrition and advanced agriculture, and also the training course for retinal surgery in May 2021.
The University of the Gambia graduated over 900 students this year. The convocation ceremony was strictly attended by invitees and graduates due to the major challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. Reporting for Africa News, I am Khadija Tuseka.
The University of the Gambia, they of course held in its 13th conversation ceremony at an event presided earlier today by the President Adama Barrow. Next to Nigeria, because despite the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the significant drop of the global oil price, the Nigerian government is committed to improve its tax revenue to 15% by 2023. Authorities of the West African states are devising new measures to include the use of technology to regularize tax collection in the country. But to achieve the outlined target, there needs to be done, or should I say, there needs to be more vigilance, experts have said. Let's have more details of that in this report.
Oil revenue essentially drives the Nigerian economy, and anytime the price of the commodity drops in the global market, Africa's largest economy catches severe cold. The government now says it is determined to fix the problem, fully diversify the country's revenue stream. Late last year, President Muhammadu Buhari signed a new finance bill into law, hoping that would help address the country's revenue challenge.
We have over 100 different amendments in the Finance Act 2020, amending like 14 different laws, including those that have to do with tax, fiscal responsibility and public procurement. But overall, I think technology and tax intelligence, based on the amendments in the Finance Act 2020, are the biggest areas of impact that we can make.
Nigeria has one of the lowest tax collection rates in the world. The country's tax to GDP ratio is a mere 6.1%. But with the new Finance Act, the government is aiming to drive up the figure to 15%. It's also increased VAT from 5% to 7.5%.
It will require a lot of connected efforts and collaboration by all levels of government, states, federal, local government, bearing in mind that our tax to GDP ratio is not just about the revenue collected at the center alone. It would also require harmony, if I may put it that way, between tax policy, tax legislation, as well as administration. But at the center of all of these are the core issues of why is it that Nigerians don't pay taxes.
The government is hoping to use technology to increase the level of tax compliance in the country. The Finance Act empowers the tax authorities to connect all business premises in the country to a central server from where all their transactions will be monitored to ensure the right taxes are paid. But a number of businesses have been resisting the move, and tax evasion is still an issue.
At the heart of it is the low tax morale, and that low tax morale is driven by the lack of trust in government. One big way to address the deficit in trust is more transparency. Communicate what you collect, communicate how you spend it, and demonstrate prudence, efficiency, and transparency in doing it. But if you can progressively sustain the reforms that are being made, then it's possible to get there, especially now using technology and tax intelligence to prevent evasion and aggressive avoidance.
Despite the challenges, the government says it is beginning to see a growth in tax collections. But its goal of driving up tax revenue to 15% of GDP by 2023 might be a hard target, as businesses in the country are still reeling from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. And experts have warned that recovery could actually take years.
And from the report there in Nigeria, we come back home and report on matters of the TRRC. Because Ngor Seka, a former acting deputy director of the National of the NIA was to combat threats from dissidents within the armed forces itself, but its role was quickly expanded to meet both real and perceived challenges from the civilian critics and opponents of the former regime. Fatmata Kasim tells us more of that in this report.
The NIA has also gained a fearful reputation for harassment of political opposition and news media. Ngor Seka, a former acting deputy director general of the NIA, draws comparison between the NSS and the NIA.
All we do was to collect intelligence. Information, I would call it. Collect information. Write reports. It will be collated, analyzed, and disseminated for decision making. This was NIA. I think shortly after the inception of the NIA, there was a unit created called the Investigation Department.
I wouldn't
be able to say what was the rationale behind creating that unit. Then I was already at the port. But I believe that was what changed the whole equation. It was rather collecting information from the bottom to the top. It was information coming from the top to the bottom.
Seka says Jammeh used to dictate the activities of the NIA and that has swayed NIA from its main function of information gathering.
I believe the regime then had interest on what they wanted to know. And all what they were doing was give instructions to the agency, investigate, and report back.
On 31st January 2017, the newly elected President Adama Barrow announced that the name of the NIA will be changed to the State Intelligence Services, SIS. The new intelligence agency is expected to regain its core function of collecting, analyzing, and exploitation of information in support of law enforcement, national security, military, and foreign policy objectives. For iAfrica News, I am Fatoumata Kasim.
The witnesses or more witnesses continue to appear before the TRRC as the Commission ended another week of its public hearing. Next to matters of the United Nations, because the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has on Friday received his second shot of the COVID-19 vaccines at Morris Academy in New York. Guterres has constantly called for equitable and fair distribution for the vaccines to be accessible to everyone. Here are more details of that by Ndesise.
It could be recalled that in December last year, Antonio Guterres declared that he will be content to receive the COVID-19 vaccine in public, which he described as a moral obligation. On Friday, the UN Secretary General returned back to France to receive the second dose of the vaccine, after he had the first dose of the vaccine in January last month. While other members of the United Nations are waiting to receive their shot of the vaccine on the local rollout plan, Guterres was desirable to be among the first in the Big Apple UN family to receive a jab of the vaccine. New York residents over the age of 65 are included in the current phase of vaccinations in the city. Antonio Guterres, while receiving his injection, says he is privileged to be receiving the second dose of the vaccine. The Manager Center where the UN chief received his vaccination says visitors at the area were doubtful about taking the vaccine due to the misinformation and mistrust on the part of the African Americans. The United Nations and its partners, including the WHO, established the COVAX facility to enable all countries access to the vaccines, regardless of their status. The UN chief described the goal of providing vaccines to all as the biggest moral test before the global community. The COVID-19 pandemic has created a historical disruption to the education system and prolonged closure of schools that could further enrich inequalities in access to learning. Reporting for iAfrica News, I am Ndesise.
The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres there receiving his second jab of the COVID-19 vaccination, and from the report there by Ndesise will now take a break and come back shortly. Stay with us, we'll be right back.
The pride we take in our brand, the work we put into constantly change the landscape and elevate real estate in the Gambia, it's compared to none. From inception, our goal was to add value to the beautiful Gambian landscape. That's why we are proud innovators of community estates. Kololi Sands is an exceptional piece of work, tailored for ultimate convenience and luxury, to bring you an element of finesse that is rare but unique in its own. This is also our pride and joy, and we welcome you to the exquisite beauty right here in Kololi and right here on the waterfront. Kololi Sands, feel the ocean breeze at your doorstep.
Welcome back, and many thanks for joining us again. And now to the rest of the stories. Now, the United Nations, in partnership with the governments of Sweden and Switzerland, will convene a virtual pledging conference for Yemen, which remains the world's largest humanitarian crisis. The event, which is set to take place on the 4th of March in Geneva, is designed to raise awareness about the rapidly deteriorating humanitarian situation in Yemen and encourage donors to pledge generosity to support humanitarian operations. The situation in Yemen remains the world's largest humanitarian crisis amid ongoing conflict and the COVID-19 pandemic and a severe economic crisis. Now, more than 20 million people need humanitarian assistance across the country, including more than 16 million who will go hungry this year. Now, this year's relief agencies will require almost $4 billion to assist 19 million people in need of humanitarian support. And from that unfortunate scenario there in the situation in Yemen next to South Africa, where South Africa is among few African countries that are able to track the number of coronavirus cases since the emergence of the virus in the continent. The monitoring and confirmation of new variants are even more difficult and costly, resulting in the virus spreading in many countries. Now, the surveillance system has been gradually widening in the continent thanks to the efforts of the Africa CDC and other partners. Here are more details of that in this report.
South Africa is one of few African countries able to track the coronavirus since reporting its first case last March. Routine genome sequencing also led to the discovery of a more transmissible strain, which drove the country's second wave.
It's quite expensive. It takes about a day or so to do the sequencing and then the analysis. But so you cannot do absolutely everyone, but we do representative samples. And from that, we learn which viruses are more common in specific settings.
Monitoring COVID-19 in other African countries hasn't been easy. Similar strains to those found in the UK and South Africa have been circulating on the continent, but it's difficult to tell which is driving a recent spike in cases and deaths.
So in South Africa, because we've got very good genetic surveillance, we are able to know that more than 90% of our isolates are the new variant. But at the moment, we do not know that, for example, for Mozambique or Botswana or the TRRC or other places, because there's not enough surveillance being done there.
There's been some improvement since the pandemic hit. Efforts by the World Health Organization and Africa Centers for Disease Control have been ramped to boost testing capabilities.
Africa is busy setting up much better genetic surveillance systems to be able to pick up these variants more easily. So there's a huge effort going on through the Africa CDC at the moment to set up such systems, but there's still very limited surveillance in Africa.
So we really have to focus our efforts here and build all the capacity that we need to track the spread and the evolution of these new variants as they emerge. Clearly, what we need is the rapid rollout of vaccines in concert with all the other measures to contain the transmission. And what's very worrying is how far behind Africa is with getting access to the vaccines.
Africa has so far secured a tiny percentage of vaccines. Just a handful of countries, including South Africa, have started small-scale rollouts, but that picture may soon change. Ghana has received the first batch of shots from COVAX, an initiative run by the World Health Organization to help the continent acquire vaccines.
South Africa there is among few African countries that are able to track the number of COVID-19 cases in their countries. Now, Colombia's President Ivan Duque on Friday launched a strong elite force to battle against drug trafficking and transnational threats. Now, the 7,000-strong force will be deployed to the areas of drug production and its borders with Venezuela. Omar Ahmad Toure has the rest of that story.
President Duque says the elite force will forcefully confront drug traffickers, terrorists and armed groups which allegedly operate across borders. The demobilization of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC, in 2016 left a power vacuum in restive regions, sparking bloody competition between remaining armed groups for control of lucrative drug trafficking and illegal mining operations. Rebels from the National Liberation Army and dissident fighters from the FARC and others who refused to demobilize under a peace deal are all present in the Catatumbo region near the border with Venezuela. The Colombian leader says the force will be tasked with subduing, beating and subjecting the structures of drug trafficking areas.
Integrada por cerca de 7,000 hombres.
This force is made up of around 7,000 men, all full of conviction, patriotism and a sense of unrestricted defense of the national interest. It is born with the purpose of breaking, striking, and subduing the structures of drug trafficking and transnational threats linked to the illegal exploitation of minerals, the trafficking of species of people, and of course, any transnational form of terrorism.
Colombian paramilitary and criminal groups acting from the Venezuelan territory have been causing tensions between Bogota and Caracas. Duque has repeatedly accused the government of Nicolas Maduro of protecting the Revolutionary Armed Forces guerrillas operating in the border area. Drugs are the main source of funding for most armed groups, including the Revolutionary Armed Force of Colombia, which has been an integral part of Colombia's conflict. The Colombian War began in 1964 and is a low-key intensity war between the government of Colombia and the Revolutionary Armed Forces and other groups fighting each other to increase their influence in the country. The FARC and other guerrilla movements claim to be fighting for the rights of the poor, protecting them from government, violence, and to protect social justice, while the government claims to be fighting for order and stability and to protect the rights and interests of its citizens. The 2006 peace agreement signed between the government and the Revolutionary Armed Forces has transitioned FARC into a normalized political life, but did not signal the end of drug trafficking in Colombia. Far from it. For iAfrica TV, I am Omar Ahmad Toure.
Con el propósito de doblegar.
Colombia set to fight against drug trafficking in the country, as highlighted by the president there in that report. And finally, that brings tonight's news week or this week's news edition to an end. But for more details on this and other stories, as always, you can log on our website on africa.tv. But for now, though, many thanks for the pleasure of your company. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and bye for now.
budé da ngay ut ay bunta manam xarañ lol